Ilara Voss was not supposed to be there. She had been hired as a translator for what she believed was an international diplomatic gathering, the kind of boring, important meetings where powerful people sat around long tables and argued in 3 languages at once. Her job was simple: translate documents from German and French into English, stay in the background, and do not draw attention to herself. That was the plan. She was good at following plans. She had been following plans her whole life, careful, quiet plans that kept her safe and invisible. After her mother passed away the previous winter, invisible felt like the only thing she knew how to be. The conference was held in the city of Veldmoor, a place Ilara had never visited before. It was an old city, full of stone buildings and narrow streets, and the kind of cold evening air that carried the smell of rain even when the sky was completely clear. She arrived on a Tuesday with 1 suitcase, a folder of pre-translated documents, and no expectations. The organization hosting the event was called the Blackthorn Council. She had asked very few questions about who they were. The contract paid 3 times her normal rate, and she needed the money. That was enough. The first day went without incident. She sat in a small office near the lower archive hall, surrounded by stacked papers, working steadily through the translations. The other staff members were polite but distant. Nobody said much to her, which suited her perfectly. She brought her own tea. She worked until her eyes felt dry, and then she went back to her hotel room and slept. The second day was when everything changed. It happened in the early evening. The building's main conference hall was on the upper floor, and the archive room, her archive room, was on the lower level, near the east corridor. The corridors all looked the same: cream-colored walls, dark wooden floors, and identical doors with no labels. She had made the same walk a dozen times already, but that evening she was distracted. She had been thinking about her mother again, the way she always did in quiet moments, and she turned left at the 3rd corridor instead of right. She pushed open the door at the end of the hall. The room she stepped into was nothing like the archive. It was enormous. A long table filled the center of it, made of dark wood so polished it reflected the ceiling lights like a mirror. Around the table sat at least 15 men and women, all dressed formally, all mid-conversation, and every single one of them stopped the moment she walked in. The silence was instant and total. Ilara froze. She had the immediate sense that she had stepped into something much larger than a political meeting. She could not explain it rationally, but the air in that room felt different, heavier, older, as if the walls themselves had been holding a secret for centuries, and her arrival had caused a small crack in their surface. All eyes moved to her. Every face was unreadable. And then she saw the man at the head of the table. He was already standing. He was tall, not unusually so, but the way he stood made the room feel smaller. His eyes were dark, his face composed with the careful stillness of someone who had spent years teaching himself not to react. He was dressed simply, in a dark jacket, no decoration, no title on display. He needed none. Everything about him said that he was the one in charge, not because anyone told him to be, but because he simply was. His name, though she did not know it yet, was Caden Blackthorn. He looked at her, she looked at him. She should have apologized immediately and backed out of the room. That was the logical thing to do. That was the safe thing, the invisible thing. Instead, she looked at him more carefully. And she saw it, the thing hidden underneath all that authority and composure. She saw the exhaustion, not the ordinary tiredness of a long meeting, something deeper. The kind of tiredness that comes from carrying too much for too long, from being the person everyone looks to when things go wrong, from never once allowing yourself to be the one who needs something. She recognized it because she had seen it in her father's face during the hardest years of her parents' lives. And she had seen it in her own reflection, many mornings, after her mother was gone. Without thinking, without planning, without knowing why the words came to her, Ilara looked directly at the man at the head of that table and whispered, very quietly, "You don't have to hold it alone tonight." It was something her mother used to say. Just that. Simple words, spoken gently, without asking for anything in return. The room did not react. But something inside Caden Blackthorn did. It was not a sound. It was not visible to anyone watching. But inside him, in the place where his wolf had been sleeping for years, silent, Still, waiting with a patience that went far beyond anything human, something woke up. Sarif lifted his head. And in one single moment, with a certainty that needed no explanation and no proof, Sarif recognized her. The bond hit Kayden like a wave, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, the way a root breaks through stone, slow and unstoppable and permanent. His eyes, without his permission, shifted to gold. It lasted only a second. He pulled them back. But every person in that room who knew what gold eyes meant had already seen it. No one spoke. Kayden looked at one of his guards near the door and gave a small nod. The guard stepped forward quietly and guided Alara out of the room with a polite hand gesture and no explanation. The door closed behind her. She stood in the hallway for a moment, her heart beating strangely fast, and then she walked back to the archive room and sat down at her desk and stared at the untranslated pages in front of her without reading a single word. She told herself it was nothing, that she had simply walked into the wrong room and embarrassed herself, and that was the end of it. She was wrong. Kayden did not sleep that night. He sat at the window of his private office on the upper floor and looked out over the rooftops of Veldmore and tried to reason his way out of what had happened. He told himself that Sarif had been dormant for too long and had simply overreacted to a stressful moment. He told himself the bond recognition was not real, that it was a product of exhaustion and pressure and 3 days without rest. Sarif said nothing. He did not argue. He simply stayed awake, quietly alert, in a way he had not been in years. By morning, Kayden had ordered a full background check on the woman from the archive. He told himself it was a security precaution. She had walked into a closed session. That was a legitimate concern. The report came back within a few hours. Alara Voss, 26 years old. Born in a small city in northern Germany. Fluent in 4 languages. No criminal record. No unusual connections. Her mother had passed away 11 months ago. She had been working freelance translation contracts since then, mostly for academic institutions, occasionally for private firms. She was, by every measure, an ordinary person. Kayden read the file 3 times. Sarif was not interested in the file. Meanwhile, on the lower floor, Alara had gone back to work. She translated steadily through the morning, but her concentration was not what it normally was. She kept thinking about the room, about the silence, about the man at the head of the table, and the way his eyes had seemed, just for a moment, to change color. She told herself that was impossible, lighting tricks, stress, her own imagination. But she also started paying closer attention to the building around her, the way some of the staff moved just slightly too quickly, the way certain conversations stopped the moment she came near. Small things that, individually, meant nothing, and together, added up to a feeling she could not name. She was a translator. Her job was to notice the things that existed between words. She was very good at her job. By the second evening, 2 things happened at once. The first, Alara found the correct archive room, finished her final batch of translations, and prepared to submit her completed work and leave the building for good. The second, a group of men she had never seen before were waiting for her near the service exit. She did not run. Running would have been useless. She understood that immediately. Instead, she was very still, and she listened, and she memorized everything she could. 3 faces, 2 distinct regional accents, the sound of a specific door closing behind her, the direction of the cold air that meant a particular window was open on the left side of wherever they were taking her. She was placed in a warehouse outside the city. The lights were off. Her hands were tied in front of her with a simple knot. She worked at the knot quietly in the dark and thought about what she knew. She knew that the people who had taken her had something to do with the conference. She knew that whatever the Blackthorn Council actually was, it was not a political organization in any ordinary sense. She knew that she had walked into the wrong room at the wrong time and said something to the wrong person, and that somehow, impossibly, that single moment was the reason she was here. She did not know that the man at the head of the table had been informed of her disappearance within 6 minutes of it happening. She did not know what it meant that his first response was not to call his security team. She did not know that Kayden Blackthorn came himself. He arrived at the warehouse in a way that she would later struggle to describe accurately. The door simply opened, and he was there. and the people who had been holding her were no longer a problem. She did not see exactly what happened. The room was dark, and it was fast, and when the lights came back on, she was the only one still in the room besides him. He crossed to her and crouched in front of her and untied the knot at her wrists without a word. His hands were completely steady. She looked at him. "I already counted 3 of them," she said quietly. Before the lights went out, 2 came from the north, 1 from the east. The one on the left had an accent from the Veldmore border region. The one on the right mentioned a name, Draven. I don't know if that's a person or a place. Caden went still. He stared at her. "You were memorizing," he said. It was not a question. "I'm a translator," she replied simply. "I notice things." Something in his expression shifted. Not much, just enough. She stood up slowly and rubbed her wrists where the rope had pressed against them, and then she looked at him with the same directness she had shown in the conference room the night before. Not afraid, not flattering, just honest. "What am I to you?" she asked. "Because I know that what happened in that room was not an accident, and I know that whatever brought you here tonight was not just security protocol." The silence between them lasted several seconds. "You are everything my wolf has been waiting for," he said. He said it the way a person admits something true that they have been trying to avoid for a long time, without decoration, without softening it, simply placing it in the open air between them. She was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean?" she asked. So, he told her. He told her what he was, what the council was, what the bond meant, as best as any of them had ever been able to explain it. A recognition that lived below thought, below choice, older than language. He told her that his wolf had been silent for years, and that the moment she spoke those quiet words in that room, Seraph had woken up for the first time since Caden could remember. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I have a lot of questions," she said finally. "I know," he replied. "I'm going to ask all of them." "I know that too." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. "Start with the most important one," he told her. She thought for a moment, then she said, "Is it always this fast?" He considered the question seriously. "I don't think fast is the right word," he said. "I think it's more that it's always been there. We just didn't know to look." She nodded slowly, as if filing the answer away. They returned to the conference building. The summit was reconvening the following morning for its final session, and Caden walked back into that long-tabled room with Ilara beside him. He did not introduce her. He did not explain. He simply sat down at the head of the table, and she sat beside him. And every person in that room understood what it meant, even if she did not yet. The alliances held. The agreements were signed. The final session closed without incident. That evening, long after the last delegate had left, Ilara sat in the chair beside Caden's office desk, with her completed translation notes in her lap, and her eyes slowly closing. She had been awake for a very long time. The chair was comfortable. The room was warm and quiet. She fell asleep without meaning to. Caden found her there when he returned from walking the last of his people out. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her. This quiet, careful, remarkably calm woman who had walked through the wrong door at exactly the right time and said the 7 words that broke 4 years of silence inside him. He took his jacket from the back of his chair and placed it gently over her without waking her. Then he stood at the window and looked out over the rooftops of Veldmore, and inside him, Seraph settled, fully, peacefully, for the first time in longer than he could count. And Caden Blackthorne, who had spent years thinking of tomorrow only as a problem to be managed, felt something he had almost forgotten was possible. He felt like tomorrow was something worth arriving at.